Hello, everybody. Good whatever time of day it is. Maybe one of you can answer. Does Torah in Motion classes take place on 2 weeks from today, on the Tuesday, which is the eve of Erev Pesach? I've written to ask, I did not get an answer, because I know that next week we've been preempted. Next Tuesday is something dedicated to Pesach, but unfortunately the time slot that they offered me I could not fill. So we're going to do our pre-Pesach today. If there is an opportunity for a class on Tuesday morning, the 31st, 2 weeks from today, then we'll do it. Otherwise, it may very well turn out in retrospect that this will be our Paitanic equivalent of a swan song. Not really sure exactly how the Paitanim would put that, but it's time to work on that. But in any event, let us at least begin now and turn our attention to the Piyut. So this, as you can see, is an excerpt from a Haggadah. It's not just any Haggadah. It happens to be an excerpt from the Haggadah Shlema, one could say the complete Haggadah. One might think that the author was a little more aspirational than that, and by Haggadah Shlemat he might have meant the perfect Haggadah, which is not entirely out of the question given that the editor was the late Rav Menachem Kasher. And given that his collection of rabbinic insights to the Torah with his annotations is known as Torah Shlema, not surprising at all that he would have named his Haggadah Shlema. But perhaps even the most interesting thing about Rabbi Kasher's Haggadah Shlema isn't even the Haggadah itself, but rather its English equivalent. See, the cover might be too dull for you to see on screen, so here we go. So these are the title pages of the English edition of the Haggadah Shlema, the Passover Haggadah, supplemented by 100 chapters comprising elaborations and additions to the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, why not? I mean, Kol ha'marbelas aper b'yetziat Mitzrayim hareza mishubach. Okay. But here's interesting. Section 2 of the supplement is called Moses, Our Teacher. Now, obviously, we know that other than an odd biblical citation, Moses makes no appearance in the Haggadah. So I imagine that Rav Kasher's objective in having a supplement devoted to Moshe Rabbeinu was to make sure that we didn't lose track of him. The third supplement is called The Beginning of Redemption, Atchalta de Geula, and the fourth is called The Land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. The fifth, interestingly, what does 5 in the context of the Haggadah suggest anything to you? And of course, I don't mean Chamisha Miyodea. Right? Most of the Haggadah is arranged in quartets. Right? There are Arba Kushyot, there are Arba Abanim, right? There are Arba Kosot. Okay? So obviously, the fifth section is devoted to the Kos Chamishi, which has its roots initially in Rambam, in the Mishneh Torah, and subsequently was championed in the early modern period by the Maharal Prague. Another supplement is called Textual Variants of the Haggadah, in which he utilizes manuscripts and even Geniza texts. And the final supplement is actually called Illustrations from Monuments of the Egyptian Bondage, which is a collection of friezes, let us say wall carvings and the like, that have survived in Egypt, which may or may not actually be from the era of the Exodus. That is simply in light of the fact that Egyptologists, historians in general, are still not in agreement as to where, within the context of ancient Egyptian history, the oppression and the Exodus should be situated. But in any event, it's simply a rather bold and clear text, so we'll make do with that. Now, for the moment, disregard the opening stanza, the Chasal Sidur Pesach. You may recognize it. We actually took note of it a couple of months ago. It is the concluding stanza of a Piyut, not of Yanai, as it says on the top of the page. That applies to the continuation, to V'chein vayhi b'chatzi halayla. But Chasal Sidur Pesach is the concluding stanza of a Piyut by the 12th century Tosafist, Rabbi Yosef Tuv Elem. Okay. You notice the chet, and then you have 2 lines down, Zach Shochein Ba'ona, that's a Zayin, and then later on you have Komeim Kahal Adat Mimana. You recall that the standard closure for a Piyut is to sign off with the letters Chet Zayin Kof. So this, just to remind you, is the concluding stanza of a Piyut that was written by Rabbi Yosef Tuv Elem to be recited on Shabbat HaGadol, and there may very well be congregations that still retain that liturgical custom, but somehow the concluding paragraph got separated from the body of the Piyut and somehow found its way into the Haggadah as the opening to Nirtzah, to the final stage of the Haggadah. But we're going to come back to that briefly later, but we're going now to go to Uvechein, and thus Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, either at midnight or whenever the middle of the night actually was. And this indeed, as it says on the top of the page, is an excerpt from a Krova that was written by Yanai, our earliest Paitan, and intended to be incorporated into the liturgy of the first day of Pesach. And it is, as I'm sure you're familiar with it from the Haggadah, a poetical summary or iteration of significant events in the biblical history of the Jewish people. So what I've done simply is in little text boxes alongside the text of the Piyut, I've already given the appropriate historical references. And again, notice the first stanza, Aleph Bet Gimel, with the refrain, Vayhi b'chatzi halayla. The second stanza picking up with Dalet Hey Vav, and again the same refrain, and going through until the conclusion of the Aleph Bet. As then Rov Nisim Hifleta Balayla, that either a major portion of the miracles, or just simply Rov in the sense of many miracles, God performed them balayla, at night, right, as we're seated around the Seder table at night. Brosh Ashmurot Ze Halayla. The Ashmurot again were the watches, and they had, at least during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they had designated time slots during which different groups of Leviim and accompanying groups of Yisraelim would be on duty, so to speak. Okay, So on this night, that is to say the same night, the first night of Pesach, Ger Tzedek, a righteous convert, Nitzachto, God awarded him a victory, Kenechalak lo laila. Nechalak lo laila, literally somehow when the nighttime split, but again, it could just simply be an idiomatic expression for chatzi halayla. After all, lachatzot is to split, lachalek is to split or to divide. So again, nechalak lo laila could be a poetic reference to midnight, or again to just simply the darkest part of the night. And who was this righteous convert who experienced a victory at night? That was Avraham Avinu, and the victory was his victory over the 4 marauding Mesopotamian kings, which enabled him to secure the release from captivity of his nephew Lot. Now,
in that story, we also have the pasuk Vayechalek Alehem Laila.
Oh yeah, clearly, yeah. I'm saying that's Chalek Alehem Laila is, again, when it says Vayechalek Alehem Laila, it means that he, Avraham, divided his forces at night, meaning he split his army. There, Vayechalek lo Laila seems to be an intransitive, referring to Avraham and his forces. Here, Kenechlak lo Laila seems to be suggesting that the night itself divided. So, as I'm saying, that's the difference. Not that there isn't a midrashic interpretation of the verse. Absolutely right that those are the words of the verse. But there, as I said, the pshat of Vayechalek Alehem Laila is probably that he had a 2-pronged attack. Okay, whereas here, Kenechlak lo Laila literally means that somehow the night itself divided. Okay, we'll see a reference in another Piyut to the same time frame, because shortly before this happened, while the Malachim were still guests of Lot in Sodom, the pasuk, as you'll remember, surely says, "Umatzot ofa vayochelo." Okay, that he baked matzah for them. Now, why did he bake matzah for them? There are a variety of reasons. One could be because it takes less time to bake a matzah than it does to bake a loaf of bread. And if his guests were hungry and it was already late at night, so he didn't want to take the time to bake bread, so he only baked matzah. But the Midrash, of course, is rarely satisfied with those conventional explanations. And the Midrash says, and it's quoted by Rashi on the verse, Pesach Haya. Why did Lot bake matzot? Because it was Pesach. Again, I believe that we've had an occasion on which to take note of the Talmudic idea that the patriarchs observed the Torah even before it was revealed at Sinai. Okay. Now, it's one thing to say that the patriarchs were Torah observant. They kept Shabbat. They kept Kashrut. I understand that. But that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov would have observed Pesach when arguably Pesach only came about as a result of Yetziat Mitzrayim, which was, as we well know, 400 years after the earliest of the Avot. I don't know. That seems to be stretching credulity a bit too far. But then again, that never stopped the Midrash. Okay. Second stanza. Danta melech grar b'chalom halayla. That somehow God judged the king of Grar. Grar was one of the cities of the Philistines, of the Plishtim, by means of a dream. Now, or something that happened at night. Now, that is apparently a reference to Yitzchak, who, if you recall, sojourned with Avimelech, the king of Plishtim, when there was a famine in the land of Israel, and God prevented him from going down to Egypt, as Abraham had. And the same thing happened to Rivka as it happened previously to Sarah, and where she was considered for the harem of the king. And again, miraculously, she and Yitzchak were spared. So again, this is a reference to that event. Hivchadata arami be'emesh laila. Now here there's no suggestion that these happened on the night of Pesach, but only that, like Pesach, these happened b'chatzi halayla at midnight, or in the middle of the night. Okay. And the arami, of course, is Lavan. And you may recall that the night before Lavan and Yaakov met, after Lavan had pursued Yaakov after his escape from Aram, God came to Lavan in a dream, right, and warned him against harming Yaakov. So this is a Chadata Arami be'emesh laila. The Yisrael, of course, that's Yaakov, Yasar La'el, right, his struggle with an Elohim, a noble or even possibly divine creature. Vayucha lo laila, again, that Yaakov overcame him at night. Zera b'chorei Patros. Patros is a Talmudic designation for Egypt. Okay. B'chorei Patros, the firstborn. Machatzta b'chatzi halayla. That's, of course, a reference to the 10th and final plague, Makat Bechorot, which took place in the middle of the night. Chelam lo matzeu bikumam balayla. When the Egyptians rose in the middle of the night on account of the plague, somehow chelam lo matzeu, they couldn't find something. I really looked hard, and the only interpretation I could find for this line is that it's a continuation of the previous one, and the chayil here is a specific reference to the firstborn, right? That the firstborn were no longer alive. Okay. Tisat nigid charoshet, the flight, not necessarily flight as in the Wright brothers, but flight as in the sense of escape. Nigid Charoshet, that's Sisra, who was the commander-in-chief of the army of Yavin Melech Hatzor, which was gathered in a place called Charoshet HaGoyim. So, Tisat Nigid Charoshet, Silita B'choch Ve'layla, that somehow God interrupted the flight of the Canaanite army, which took place at night, somehow by means of the stars. That the stars themselves fought on behalf of the Jewish people. That is part of the Shirat Dvorah, part of the song that the Dvorah composed to mark this victory. One of the lines of the Shirah reads, "Hakochavim b'mesilotam nilchamu b'sisra." Now maybe it means that there was a meteor shower. I don't know, right? But clearly it's something out of the ordinary. Ya'atz mecharef linnofef ivui hovashta pigarav balayla. That at night, God somehow dried out, desiccated the corpses of people who are called mecharef, blasphemers, okay? Linofef ivui, who surrounded a desirable place. That seems to be a reference to the Assyrian army led by Sancheriv, which had surrounded Jerusalem, and miraculously the siege was called off in the middle of the night when a plague broke out amongst the Assyrians. So again, this is yet another incident in which the Jewish people enjoyed a respite from their enemies or a victory over their enemies due to something unusual that transpired at night. Kara Baal. Baal is Baal, right? A Mesopotamian god. Kara, he knelt. Now, that's to say that he was overcome, because gods always stand up straight. They don't kneel to anybody. And yet, Kara Baal umatzivo, and a statue representing the god Baal, right, was brought to its knees bi'ishon laila, at night. And that was a dream that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had, as we're told in the book of Daniel. Le'ish chamudot, that's Daniel, who is called an ish chamudot, a lovely man. Nigla raz chazot laila, again, that God endowed him with the ability to interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. And again, that too is associated with the middle of the night. Mishtaker, that is the reflexive of shikor, right, to become intoxicated. Somebody became intoxicated, bichlei kodesh, drinking from holy vessels. Neherag bo valayla, right, who somehow met his end at night. This is a reference to Belshazzar, the successor to Nebuchadnezzar, who made a party. And at the party, the book of Daniel says explicitly that he served people, he called for things to be, food and drink to be dispensed in the vessels that he had liberated from the temple in Jerusalem. Noshami Bora Rayot, that's Daniel who was rescued from the lion's den. Poter interpreted the handwriting on the wall, Bi'itute Laila at night. Sin'a Natara Gagi, Haman, right, expressed his enmity towards the Jewish people. The Chatav Sfarim Balayla, and had the royal orders for their destruction written at night. Orarta nitzchacha alav, and yet God enabled the Jewish people to overcome them. Beneded shnat laila, when somebody's sleep was interrupted. Reference, of course, to Achashvero, balayla hahu nadeda shnat hamelech. Pura. Pura is a biblical synonym for a gat, a place where either wheat is threshed or grapes are stomped. Pura tidroch, lishomer mami laila. This is an oblique reference to the nation of Edom, because the Edomites joined with the Babylonians in the siege and destruction of Jerusalem at the end of the first temple, right? There are references to this in Tehillim, right? In the Perek of Al Naharot Bavel, where we recall the destruction of the temple, right? There is a reference to Edom, okay? To Edom's participation. It's also reflected in the prophecies of Yirmiyahu and of Ovadiah. So Edom, as it were, is going to be threshed. Okay, the Shomer Mami Laila, that it will get its just desserts, so to speak. Tzarach kashomer vasach, something will be called out, right? What will be called out? A voice will come out proclaiming Ata voker v'gam laila, that the night is coming to an end and dawn will break. Now, if the night is synonymous with oppression, then dawn has to be synonymous with salvation. So who will call out saying the night is coming to an end and dawn will shortly break? It's alluded to the Mashiach. Okay, and now that we're in a messianic mood, so to speak, we get not a prophecy per se, but an aspirational stanza. Karev Yom, the day indeed will come. Ashehu lo Yom v'lo Laila. Now, either it means that time will be different in the Messianic era, or it will mean that it will be a day unlike anything that has preceded it. Okay. Ram Hoda Kilacha Yom Aflacha Laila. And it will be known on high that everything, all time, belongs to God. Shomrim Hafked Le'ircha. God then will appoint watchmen over his city, the city of Jerusalem. Kol hayom b'chol halayla, both by day and by night. And the concluding line is ta'ir ke'or yom cheshkat layla. And again, there will be a change, as it were, in nature. And the darkest part of the night, cheshkat layla, will be as bright as or yom as it is during the day. And that basically brings the Piyut, the poem, to its close. Now, that's followed in the Haggadah. And again, you can see there are instructions. In some Haggadot, it'll tell you, you say one of these Piyutim on the first night, and you say the other Piyut on the second night. But if it turns out that the first night is on Shabbat, then maybe you say the first one on the second night and the second. In any event, there are customary differences. But yet, this second Piyut was by Eliezer HaKalir. Remembering again, he was a successor to Yanai. Whether he was not just a successor, but whether he was actually a disciple of Yanai is, as far as I know, still a matter of speculation. But clearly, his Paitanic style is that of Yanai. And this Piyut, Uvechein, thus, Amartem Zevach Pesach, those three words themselves are taken from the Torah, Amartem Zevach Pesach Hu Lashem. If you are asked, what are you doing? You say, this is a Zevach Pesach, this is a Pesach offering Lashem to God, Asher Pasach al Batei Avotenu b'Mitzrayim, b'not Poet Mitzrayim, v'Batenu Itzil, an account of God having spared our households in Egypt. I should actually pause for a moment and make a philological note. It's interesting what the actual root meaning of the word Pei Samach Chet is. If you look in your concordances, you'll find a pasuk in Yeshayahu. I'm even going to take a moment here, and I'm actually going to call it up so I can show it to you. I don't suspect that you would doubt my accuracy, but we know that, Re'iyah trumps Shmi'ah. So give me 1 second, and I will get the verse. Am I in Hebrew? Hebrew. And I want it only in Tanakh. Okay. Here we go. Okay. I make this bigger because I can hide this. And let me let you all into the... Okay, so here is a verse. You see it in Yeshayahu, Perek Lamed Aleph? Okay, the screen has changed, yes? Okay, now say, verse 5. Kitziporim afot. This is a prophecy of consolation to the people of Jerusalem who are either shortly going to be surrounded by the Assyrians, by Sancherib, as we've already mentioned. This is Perek Lamed Aleph. The siege of Sancherib is described in Yeshayahu, beginning with Perek Lamed Vav. So this is either perhaps an anticipation of the siege, or maybe the siege had already begun, it had already unfolded. And the prophet is already reassuring the people that they may yet survive the siege. So look what he says in Pasuk Hey. Kitziporim afot, ken yagein Hashem tzvaot al Yerushalayim. Right? That the manner in which God will protect, will shield Yerushalayim is similar to the flight of birds. Now, meaning, you can trap a bird, right? But it's very difficult to trap it, okay? So he's basically suggesting that even though the people in Jerusalem may it appear to themselves that they're being trapped now, right? Just as birds can fly out, of a cage, so to speak, they too. So what is the conclusion? It says, ganon, right? Again, that's to shield, hitzil, to rescue, pasoach, v'himlit. So notice, you have ostensibly four synonyms, four synonymous verbs in the pasuk, all of them indicating some form of rescue or salvation. Ganon, we know the word lahagen, magen, hitzil, hatzala, right? Himlit, right? Palit, himlit, to escape, right? And pasoach. So does pasoach here mean to pass over in the sense of to skip? Or does pasoach here mean to rescue? When it says that God pasach al hapetach, that God did something to the doorways of the Jewish people, right? V'lo yiten hamashchit lavo batechem lingof, and he will not allow the plague to enter the Jewish houses, okay? Then does Pesach mean the manner in which God spared the Jewish people by skipping over, passing over their doorways? Or does it simply mean that God spared, rescued the Jewish people by having the plague pass over their doorways? So as I'm saying, Pesach may mean to skip over, right? Or it may just simply have the general meaning of to save, to spare, to shield, to rescue. And in the particular instance of the Exodus from Egypt, right, the manner in which the rescue, the shielding, the salvation, the sparing was effected was because the doorways were coated with blood, and therefore the plague passed over them. Be that what as it may, back to the Piyut. Okay. Ometz gvurotecha hifleta ba'Pesach. You notice that the opening here is almost identical to the opening of the earlier Piyut. This was nisim hifleta, and this is gevurotecha hifleta. Okay, not surprising then again that this is Yanai, that the first one was Yanai, and this was his successor, perhaps even disciple, Eliezer HaKaliri. So God displayed his gevurot, his heroic deeds on Pesach. Barosh Kol Mo'adot, right? Pesach, the first of all of the festivals. Niseta Pesach, Pesach is the first of the Shalosh Regalim. Gilita le'ezrachi chatzot leil Pesach, and God appeared to Avraham, who is known again in rabbinic literature as the Ezrachi, because he came from the Mizrach, he came from the east. Okay, chatzot leil Pesach again, and that is the context that we made allusion to previously, that the visits of the Malachim to Lot, and because the visits to Lot were only a short amount of time after their visit to Avraham, then if their visit to Lot transpired during the holiday of Pesach, then arguably so did their visit to Avraham take place during Pesach. Okay. Dlatav dafakta kechom hayom ba'Pesach. Okay. Somehow you knocked on his door, again to announce yourself. Kechom hayom. That's what it says. Vayira elav Hashem belonei mamrei v'yoshev petach ha'ohel kechom hayom. Okay, so again at noon, right, ba'Pesach, his'id, that he gave sa'ad or se'udah, that Abraham prepared a meal, notzitzim ugot matzot ba'Pesach, that Abraham too served his guests matzot. Vel habakar ratz, again from the same perek in Breshit. Vela bakar ratz Avraham vayikach ben bakar rachbato vayiten el anar vayimaher lasototo. Why bakar zecher l'shor erech Pesach? Again, because of the prominence of the shore of the bull in Egypt at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So again, as though Abraham, the meal that Abraham prepared for his guests, having matzah and having bakar, somehow was a foreshadowing of Pesach. Right? The people of Sodom incurred God's wrath, and they were destroyed through fire on Pesach. Chulatz Lot mehem. Lot, however, was plucked out. Right, he was rescued. Umatzot afa b'ketz Pesach. We've already made reference to this. Titeta, a matate is a broom. Titeta, you swept. Admat mof v'nov, those are biblical synonyms for Egypt. Be'ovrecha ba'Pesach, that when God passed through Egypt on Pesach, the night of Yetziat Mitzrayim, right, he kind of like swept everything clean. Yah, Rosh kol on machatzta b'leil shimur Pesach. On again is one of the principal cities of Egypt. So again, it was stricken on the night of Pesach. Kabir, right, God, okay, remember from the previous song, Adirhu Yivne Beto. So the kaf letter is Kabirhu, so Kabir, God. Alkein, Bechor, Pasachta, B'dam Pesach. Again, the simultaneity of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the rescue of the Jewish people to whom God refers as B'ni Bechori Yisrael, as his firstborn, right? Coming in the wake of the plague which struck down all the firstborn of Egypt. Liviltitet mashchit lavo biftachai b'Pesach, again, that somehow the blood kept the plague from entering. If we're again making reference to the shielding of the Jewish houses by the smearing of blood, is a curious thing. The instructions that the Torah gives is to take the blood of the slaughtered animal, and it says to place it al shtei hamizuzot va'al hamashkof. Right? The blood was to be smeared on the two door posts, shtei hamizuzot, the door posts, va'al hamashkof, and on the transom. Okay. Now, there's something missing here, meaning if this is, the technical term is apatropaic, that is to say that if this is something which is done by design in order to prevent an evil spirit from entering, so if you're smearing the doorposts and the lintel, okay, something's missing, right? This is not complete because there's still the threshold. So maybe the evil spirit will avoid the doorposts and avoid the lintel, but what's to prevent the evil spirit from entering by crossing over the threshold? The Torah does not instruct the Jewish people to smear the blood on the threshold. However, it does say that the blood is to be smeared on the doorposts and on the lintel with agudat ezov, with a clump of grass, and that the blood, it says, badam asher basaf, that the clump of grass has to be dipped into the blood, which is in something called a saf. And from there it gets smeared on the doorposts and on the lintel. Now, with all due deference to most of the translations, which translates saf as a vessel, meaning that when you slaughtered the animal, you collected the blood in a vessel, right? And that's vessel called a saf, like sifina, okay? The Hebrew word sifina means a vessel. I know in modern Hebrew it means a boat, but remember that vessel is a synonym for a boat, okay? So saf is usually understood as a sifina, a vessel. The blood was collected in the vessel, and the clump of grass was dipped into it and smeared on the doorposts and on the lintel. But as I said, that would seem to leave the threshold clean. So I believe it's Ibn Ezra who points out that the word saf in Hebrew can also mean a threshold. You may remember that the prophet Elijah accuses the Kohanei Habal, the priests of Baal. He says, Ad matai atem posechim al shnei ha-se'ipim. Sif, saf, that they're kind of straddling the threshold on both sides. So I would argue that the reason that there was no instruction to smear the blood on the threshold is because that's where the animal was slaughtered. The animal was slaughtered in the doorway, and therefore the blood already collected on the threshold, and therefore in order to keep the mashchit out, it only needed to be added to the doorposts and to the lintel. Anyhow, just something you might want to think about at the Seder. Okay, going on. Misugeret, something that was closed up. Sugra be'itote Pesach. It closed itself off Pesach time. That's a reference to the city of Yericho. If you follow the chronology at the beginning of the book of Joshua, right, shortly before the siege of Jericho, the Jewish people enjoy their first meal in 40 years, meaning the first time that they are eating something other than man. Vayochlu me'avor haaretz, they were able to eat from the produce of the land, and that was during the time period in Nisan after they crossed the Jordan prior to Pesach. So the conquest of Yericho took place on Pesach. Nishmedam bidyan b'tzlil sa'orei omer Pesach. This is a bit of a stretch. You may recall from the book of Shoftim that one of the things that encourages Gideon to attack the Midianites is that he hears one Midianite soldier telling another about a dream that he had. And he says that in the dream there was this roll, this sheaf of barley, and it rolled through the camp, the Midianite camp, and knocked everything down. And their understanding was that the Israelites are going to conquer us. So barley has an association with Pesach, right? On the second night of Pesach, we begin the count of the Omer, and the Omer is related to the ripening of barley. Okay. Sarfu mashmane pul velud biakad yekod Pesach, something, the healthy or fat places of pul and lud, which are two biblical territories, but not easily identifiable. Somehow they were put to fire on Pesach. Your guess is as good as mine as to what incident this is referring to. And now again, we start this transition into as in the poem of Yanai that preceded it, into something more eschatological, a view towards a messianic future, right? Quotation, a famous pasuk in Yeshayahu, Od hayom benov la'amod, right? That somehow the sun will stand still, okay? Ad ga'a or not Pesach. At what time of year will this happen? It will happen during the time of Pesach. You may be familiar with a Talmudic adage which says, "Ben Nisan nig'alu," that just as the Jews experienced their first instance of deliverance during the month of Nisan, "Ben Nisan atidin lehi ga'el," that the ultimate redemption, the ultimate deliverance will also occur during the month of Nisan. Pas yad katva leka'ake atzul ba'Pesach. That's again a reference to the handwriting on the wall. Okay. Safo hatzafit aroch hashulchan ba'Pesach. Again, I gave you the biblical citation. It's a verse in Isaiah 21, and you got to figure out on your own, as I said, whether he had something specific in mind or whether, once again, Safo hatzafit, the watchman looking off into the distance, whether, again, this is just some sort of eschatological or messianic aspiration. Kahal kinsa hadasa l'shalesh tzom ba'Pesach. Again, historically, Ta'anit Esther was not 1 day but 3 days, right? Sumu alai shloshet yamim laila vayom. And again, historically, the Ta'anit Esther did not take place on the eve of Purim, but it took place actually during the month of Nisan. Rosh mi beit Rasha, that would be Haman. Machatzta be'etz chamishim ba'Pesach, that he was hung on this 50 cubit high gallows on Pesach. Shtei Ela, right? Both of these incidents, Rega Tavi, can once again transpire in an instant, Leutzit, for somebody who comes from the land of Utz. I know of 2 characters who come from the land of Utz. Biblically, the land of Utz is a synonym for the land of Edom. Okay? We have Sisi v'Simchi bat Edom in Echa Yoshevet be'eretz Utz, which is also the land in which the Eov lived, right? Ishaya be'eretz Utz, Eov shemo. Okay, so apparently, again, this is a reference to Edom, and again, as in the previous Piyut, Edom is simply synonymous with enemies who destroyed the Jewish people and destroyed the temple. Ta'oz yadacha tarum yiminecha, God's arms, that is the symbol of his strength, will once again be raised. Kalel hitkadesh chag Pesach, as indeed his arms, so to speak, were raised on that original Pesach night at the time of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So just in case we get no subsequent opportunity to discuss this before Pesach, we will have fulfilled our obligation, since indeed the Talmud tells us, Shloshim Yom Kodem HaChag, right, that 30 days before the inception of a holiday, one should already begin to discuss holiday matters. So we have done that. Now, I come back now to the paragraph that we skipped initially. The one here on the left-hand side of the page, this, as you can see, is an excerpt from a venerable Haggadah, the Prague Haggadah, right, one of very early printed Haggadot, 1526, where you see a couple of interesting things. Not going to go through the text of Chasal Sidur Pesach. We did that on the occasion that we related to the balance of the Piyut by Yosef Tuvelem. But notice again, just here, the location. Okay, in most machzorim, right? L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim follows Chasal Sidur Pesach. Here, as you see, it precedes Chasal Sidur Pesach. Okay. Again, a minor observation, but a correct one nevertheless. And again, notice that unlike the Haggadah Shlema, in which Chasal Sidur Pesach is followed by the Piyut Bayanai, right, by Bamartem, by the Piyut of Vayiba Chatzi Halayla, here it's followed by Adir Hu, another one of the Piyutim that is part of the Nirtza stage of the Seder. Here I just wanted to share an observation with you. The late Professor Shlomo Dov Goitein, the doyen, the master of Geniza studies, studied thousands of Geniza texts. His principal interest was in social and economic history. And he even published he published a multi-volume work called Mediterranean Jewish Society, but he also published an independent volume that consisted only of commercial correspondence. And he made an observation that something similar to L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim frequently served as a closure, meaning it was the last thing, the end of a letter. At the end of a letter, instead of writing sincerely yours, right? He found that very, very often people would say L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim. And he had grounds on which to determine that these letters were being exchanged between people who had no realistic expectation of ever being reunited. It's not as though two family members, one let's say in Egypt and one overseeing the family business either in Iraq or in India, had made plans to spend Pesach, right, in the, I don't want to give any advertising, the ex-hotel in Yerushalayim. So they wrote to each other, see you in Yerushalayim, right? He knew that people, because he was able in many cases to follow the details of their lives. As I said, people who had no realistic expectation of ever being reunited would nevertheless write to one another, see you in Yerushalayim next year. His takeaway that this was an expression of spiritual fulfillment more than the anticipation of a physical reality. Now I just want to very quickly, indeed, hopefully if we have an opportunity yet before Pesach, to talk very briefly about Abraham Ibn Ezra's critique of Piyut. Let me just now call your attention to the fact that his critique of Piyut accompanies his commentary on the beginning of the 5th perek of Kohelet. The first pasuk in Kohelet perek Hey starts with Al tevahel al picha. Don't speak thoughtlessly. And apropos of the injunction not to engage in thoughtless speech, Ibn Ezra has a very, very lengthy and very, very detailed and very, very vitriolic critique of early Palestinian Piyut. In fact, I would say 90%, more than 90% of it is a critique of the Piyutim of Yanai and HaKalir, and the balance, 5-7%, 10 at the most, is, since all of that is no good for a variety of different reasons that Ibn Ezra provides, and you can see a summary of it here, at the very end, he says, but the Piyutim of Sa'adia Gaon, right, they're very different. The Piyutim of Sa'adia Gaon do not engage in the same kind of thoughtlessness that is reflected in the Piyutim of Yanai and HaKalir, and therefore he encourages people to use and to emulate the Piyutim of Sa'adia. But the bottom line, as you see here, is that he claims basically that Piyut fails when it replaces linguistic truth and theological clarity with verbal excess and rhyme-driven distortion. Basically, he claims that Yanai and Kalir and others made up words. They made them up because they had to fit certain rhyme schemes or patterns and the like. And again, that's his critique of it. And while we're on the subject, again, just to share with you a couple of little trifles apropos of Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra was a poet himself. And as we've seen, we just made reference to the fact he was also a critic of poetry. And in one of his critiques of poetry, he makes the following pun. There's a biblical prohibition against yoking an ox and a donkey together. Okay? And the biblical prohibition is lo tacharosh bishor uvachamor yachdav, right? Don't hook an ox and a donkey up to the same plow. Ibn Ezra punned on it, changing it to lo tacharoz, bishor uvachamor yachdav, pointing out that the word shor and the word chamor should not be used as poetic rhymes. Even though they each share a final vowel and consonant, or and or, a rhyme, according to Ibn Ezra, has to consist of a consonant, vowel, and consonant. Therefore, what does he say? Again, upon on another biblical verse, right? If you come across a bird's nest, you have to send the mother bird free, shalech tishalach. He says, shalech tishalach et hashor lemi shor, meaning the word shor, a credible rhyme, is the word mi shor, because it too ends with the same consonant, vowel, consonant. Vet hachamor le'eretz hamor, again with the same final consonant, vowel, consonant. And again, just because I had room on the page, even though I'm running out of room on the clock, this is a rather nifty little trifle in which Ibn Ezra engaged. According to the legend, somebody sent Ibn Ezra a jar of honey as a gift, but when he opened the jar of honey, there was a fly in the ointment. So Ibn Ezra suspected somehow that was put in there purposely. So he wrote back to the gifter that he removed the offending creature from the honey and destroyed it. So he wrote, reading down, okay, parashnu, to separate, ra'avtan shebidvash, whatever that creature was that was hungry enough to insinuate itself into the jar of honey, nitba'er, like bi'or chametz, right? It was set apart, it was removed, v'nisraf, and it was consigned to the flames. However, you notice that you can read the same thing vertically as well as horizontally. If you read from the pei in the upper right-hand corner down instead of across, you get the same thing. Parashnu ra'avtan shebidvash nitba'er v'nisraf. And if you start at the pei at the end in the bottom left-hand corner, you can do the same thing. It reads horizontally, parashnu ra'avtan, from left to right, shebadvash nitba'er v'nisraf, and it also reads again vertically, again backwards, parashnu ra'avtan shebadvash nitba'er v'nisraf. This is not the only example of its kind. I don't remember offhand what this is called, but again, since we've taken note of Ibn Ezra, I thought that it was worth bringing to your attention. It's there on the source sheet if you want to study it further. Now, as I said, next Tuesday, to the best of my knowledge, the entire day is different Pesach-oriented classes by Torah and Moshe. Let me just see whether in the interim I've gotten an email. Here we go. I did get an email from Rabbi Kelman that there are classes on the 31st. Okay, I thought maybe since it was Erev Pesach, maybe they thought that people might be too preoccupied, but we'll find something, we will indeed find something to do that day that is Pesach oriented. Maybe, and again, we'll come back and do a little bit, just some little examples from Ibn Ezra's critique of Piyut. And so with that, I wish you all until we meet again. Wasn't that from Roy Rogers? Right? No, wasn't that the Roy Rogers song? Happy trails to you until we meet again?
I think so.
So for those of you who are, may by Erev Pesach be on your way or already wherever you're spending Pesach, so happy trails to you, and again, till we meet again. So le'yitraot, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Toda rabah.
Bevakasha.
I just had this one question to ask you.
Yes?
Just one second, I have two things on here. Can you hear me?
I hear you more than once. You're echoing.
No, I have a problem. All right. My question is in the notes. Hello?
Yes?
No, I can't, forget it. I'm having trouble with my,
Well, if you want to write it out and email it to me, my pleasure, or you want to wait until the class before
I can't do
Pesach
it.
and bring it up then, we can do
Forget
either
it.
one of those. Okay? All right. Leatraut, everyone.